Well, Justin, it is so great to be with you today. And we are so delighted to be talking together about this book, Together for Good. This is your new book, which has just come out this year. And we have been delighted to be your publishing partner here at P&R and thought that we would take some time to just have a conversation about the book and kind of why you wrote it, who it's for, what's in the book, what would someone benefit from by actually getting this book. And so we'll start with kind of maybe, hopefully, an easy question for you. And that is just the
hmm
question of what was your heart passion behind this book? Why did you feel like you needed to write a book called Together for Good? And maybe as you're doing that, tell us a little bit about what is this book as well.
hmm Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Dave. It's great to be able to talk about the book, and I'm thrilled to be partnering with PNR with this. Yeah. So, Together for Good is something that was born out of our years of overseas cross-cultural ministry. And over the years, we experienced a lot of challenges moving from one city to another, dealing with the day-to-day cross-cultural pressures. But more than that, as we would go back, as we would visit with ministry couples in the States, we began to see some themes. We saw some of the pressures people are living under. We also learned some of the principles from God's word that were really effective in our lives. There were times where we didn't know if we were going to make it. And seeing God use his word to transform us uh, just gave us a burden to help others. And so we eventually put that in book form, and we hope it is a great help to others.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving us a little bit of that background. It's got a very clever title, Together for Good. Unpack
Yeah.
that with me a little bit.
Yeah.
Why that title, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of a pun, but together for good, for the long haul, but also for good purposes. It is focused on couples in Christian ministry, although I think you'll find that it's not exclusive just to those in vocational ministry. I've also already heard from some who have read it that they found it very helpful, even if their day job is something totally different. But it is focused on those who are more involved in Christian service. And so that's the for good part of it, but also staying together, not just staying married, but having a thriving, healthy marriage, even while dealing with all the pressures of ministry.
Yeah. Well, we are so delighted to have a resource like this. It really felt like as we were evaluating this with you, there just wasn't a lot else like this out there
Yeah,
available specifically for ministry couples that
yeah,
deals with this interesting intersection of where ministry and marriage can be in tension with one another at times.
yeah.
And
hmm
so I'm interested if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that you were seeing, frankly, in other couples, maybe in your own
yeah,
life, that you're
yeah,
sort of like, wow, these are really concerning, and where some of those tensions come to play as you see it.
yeah. Well, in the book, we talk about some of those things like the stressors that are somewhat unique to ministry that they bring on the marriage. For us, we saw some of this just in dealing with all the pressures of a young family, learning language in a new setting, dealing with environmental factors in a crowded urban center. And so for us, it brought us into experiences of depression, stress, and it was really only through the intervention of others around us and the support of others that help bring us out of that using God's word and some helpful principles from His word. So our own experience definitely is something that drew us towards this. But um, we've seen many couples in ministry question their effectiveness.
Mhm.
Is it worth doing what I'm doing?
Mhm.
The book touches on burnout, but it's not a burnout book per
Yeah.
se. Um, but there is a high cost, and we felt that recognizing the cost of ministry is
Mm.
part of effectively
Mhm.
addressing and
Yeah.
using the means God's given us to
Yeah.
support us in those times.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. if you were to identify sort of two or three, or you could get more if you want,
Yeah.
but indicators that a couple who, senses there's tension, not quite sure what's going on,
Yeah.
but areas where they should really be paying attention, um, that the kind of content that your book, has would be valuable to them.
Yeah.
This word is sometimes sets people's hair on fire, but the word trigger comes to mind. But I think
Yeah.
you use the term stressors and pressures in your book.
Yep.
And so, are there
Mhm.
particular ones that you'd say, yeah, if I were counseling somebody, these are two or three areas I would say to pay particular attention to because they're likely to lead to this if you're not paying attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think when you feel like you and your spouse are constantly in discord, there's not harmony, you're not in sync with one another. Um, that's a big sign. When you're
Yeah,
too busy to actually talk and process through anything, that's something we often
yeah.
saw is so busy. Ministry's often so busy for everybody.
Hmm.
And couples are pulled in different directions. So I guess that goes back to the title,
Yeah,
Together
yeah.
for Good. But when you feel like you're always in different directions or you're always out of sync, and that can turn out to be tensions, like forgetting appointments, or you got
Mm-hmm.
two things going on at the same time, you're double booked. There's no time to actually talk and debrief as a couple.
Hmm. Hmm.
Those are some red flags. In the book, there's also a section about 12 warning signs that you
Mm,
might experience
that's
when
great.
you're starting to well, for yourself to look at your own life, but also things you're starting to see in your spouse as well, to kind of be vigilant for one another.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
That's really helpful. That was something I was going to talk about next a little bit is that the way you designed this book and wrote it is so fascinating because there are diagnostic tools that are embedded in
yeah,
it. It's
yeah.
designed potentially to be used together as a couple. So talk a little bit about that, how, in your ideal world,
Hmm.
if you were, again, counseling a couple, how you would envision them using the book together.
Yeah. Well, I think of this book as being a substitute for if I were there face to face. This is
Yeah,
what I would want to say to a couple.
yeah,
And while I guess to some degree I had in mind younger couples that are starting out, like sort of a mentoring, uh, maybe even a premarital counseling type setting. But I've also heard from others who have been married for 60 years who have said that they found
yeah,
this helpful. Um, but yeah, it's designed as a session for couples to work through together and to talk through some thought-provoking questions. And I've also heard from one of my mentors that he is going to be starting it with a young couple that's heading towards vocational ministry, and they're going to work through it in that sense, where a veteran, experienced couple will work through it with a younger
yeah.
couple and that just is one of the things I really hope for the book is that
Hmm.
it's not just after the problems
Hmm.
start. It's not just
Hmm.
when you
Yeah,
are at a breaking
yeah.
point. It's preventative.
Hmm.
It's what we wish we would have known 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Which again is one of the reasons we're so excited to have this, that hopefully God will use this kind of a book to really touch people earlier in their marriages
Yeah.
so that, they are putting in some of those guardrails and doing some of those things
Yeah.
that you're really recommending here. And one of the things you mentioned earlier that I want to kind of dive into now is this is
Yeah.
not just a self-help book. This is not just
Hmm.
a 10 steps to fix your marriage book. This is a deeply biblical resource. And I think that that's one of the things that we're committed to as a publisher in biblical counseling is that it's counseling that
Amen.
actually is biblical. And so
Hmm.
as you're getting into this book, I was fascinated by your chapter 2, embracing weakness by design.
Mm.
Because that really gets at some core theological principles as well about how we
Hmm.
think about ourselves. But if you want to just spend a minute or two talking about that principle in particular and where in the Bible maybe or anything that you want to share biblically about that that really kind of led you to putting that so early in the book. So
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of us grow up with that American can-do attitude, and Um, if we find ourselves naturally disciplined and methodical, we find it we're drawn to this. Just keep going, just plow through,
mhm,
just be stronger.
Yeah.
But as we go through life, we find out that we're human, we're weak, and that's not an excuse. But if we look at Scripture, God often, we could say almost always, used people in their weakness to
Mm-hmm.
magnify His strength. We
Mm-hmm.
saw Gideon having to shed his army. We
Yeah.
saw Paul
Mm-hmm.
talked about his grace is sufficient,
Yeah.
strength is made perfect in weakness. Christ Himself coming as
Mm-hmm.
an infant. Um, so we see this theme that God uses humans in their weakness, but that doesn't become
Mm-hmm.
an excuse to allow us to just ignore flaws.
Right.
It's never meant to be that. But where I really was drawn to that principle was just how I had seen so many ministry couples in particular. It felt like they were at different speeds. One might be super high energy,
Mm-hmm.
super, at least outwardly,
Yeah.
very strong, very active. Others, their strength is different. It's more internal, and maybe you see external weakness. It could be
Yeah.
as simple as
Yeah.
a lot of physical ailments and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or a lower capacity, lower energy. But and that seemed to be a lot of the tension is the strong and weak. But
Mm-hmm.
and in this, we explore this in that chapter, is that really all of us do have those strong areas and weak areas, and coming to appreciate those
Yeah.
is where I think we see God really bringing us together for His good purposes. And um, we could say somewhat, I wouldn't say offsetting, but
Mm-hmm.
strengthening one another in those
Yeah.
areas where there may be
Yeah.
weakness.
Yeah. We don't often think about weaknesses as being complementary, but this
Yeah,
that there's strength
yeah,
and weakness that God uses in each of us.
yeah,
And
yeah.
certainly Paul talks about this reality that God uses the weak things
Yes.
and the lesser things of the world
Yeah.
to shame the strong and the powerful. And
Hmm.
he often chooses those things that the world would not choose. And so often in
Hmm.
ministry, I think people find themselves going, God, why did you choose me for this particular role? And yet He did
Hmm.
choose them for
Yep.
that, whether that's in the pastorate or as a missionary or something else.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then there comes that tension of, okay, Lord, if I get a sense that you've called me to this, but why is my marriage so hard? Why is this
Yeah.
situation so
Mm-hmm.
difficult that I'm struggling with? Why aren't you making it easier for me in my marriage when my
Hmm.
ministry itself is also really tough?
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that's just an interesting dynamic that the Lord does choose to work in and through us in our weaknesses
Hmm.
as well as in our
Hmm.
strengths. But
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, you in your chapter 3 talk a little bit about evaluating health inside and out. Tell me what you mean by that. Do you mean internally and externally in the individual, or inside and outside of the marriage? What are you thinking about when you talk about that in the chapter there?
Yeah. Well, I think where we really start, and not because it's more important, but just because the physical can affect us
Mhm.
so much. So,
Oh, for sure.
I start by addressing maybe medical issues, physical issues, even environmental.
Yeah.
One of the things we experienced was being in a very, very smoggy city, one of the most air polluted, most
Hmm.
polluted cities in the world at that time.
Hmm.
And there's just a heaviness you would
Yeah.
feel when you don't see the sun. I know people
Yeah.
in the north experience that as well in winter sometimes, but um, so it's not to say that those factors are most important, but
Hmm. Hmm.
those are a little easier to clear and say, okay, I've checked this and I've
Hmm.
addressed this. And
Hmm. Hmm.
but we don't want it to only be material and physical. We want to
Yeah.
then look at the
Yeah.
heart. Not everything's a sin hunt, but
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
do want to look at our internal posture.
Yeah.
What's driving us? We touch on motives.
Hmm.
How are we measuring our so-called success in ministry?
Yeah.
Is it for the accolades of people, or is it
Hmm.
judged by faithfulness to His
Yeah.
calling? And so by starting with the physical and the external, but then also moving to internal and motives
Hmm.
and the heart, we hope to be healthy in and out,
Yeah.
as the chapter says.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. I think sometimes. yeah, we can tend to overemphasize one or the other. Hey, if
Hmm.
I just take care of my body, everything else will just be fine,
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
Or hey, if I've got this really strong focus on my internal kind of set with God or whatever, but I'm
Yeah.
burning the candle at both ends and I'm not taking care of my
Right.
body.
Right.
Those all can, as you know, I grew up, overseas myself, and I would see
Yeah.
many missionaries where there was this sense of like quote unquote burning out for God, and somehow
Yeah.
that was a value or something rather
Hmm.
than something to be concerned about.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I'm so glad you included this. Right
Yeah.
in the middle of your book, though, you have a really fascinating chapter on cultivating God's restorative gifts. And I feel like it's almost like you're beginning to pivot with the book here. It's kind of a hinge
Mm-hmm.
chapter in certain ways, moving from just diagnostics, moving from just kind of assessing where we are with our marriage and our ministry to saying, okay, now what, in a sense, do we do with that? How do we start thinking
Mm.
about that? So talk us through that a little bit, because that feels like a really positive turn for this book. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I do want the tone of the book to be positive, to not be just describing how hard
yeah,
it is and how challenging it is. So
exactly.
toughen up and make it.
Yeah.
But really, God has given us things. When we say He works in our weakness, He doesn't just leave us there to flounder. He gives us things. Part of that is church community, His Word, the sacraments, all these things. Um, but we also talk about simple things like the enjoyment of nature, of
Mhm.
food,
Mhm.
and I use Christ in His example how He didn't have a home, and yet He wasn't some hermit living in the desert that
Yeah.
never enjoyed life. He
Yeah.
went to parties with people.
Yeah.
There was a deeper purpose to His life than just fun,
Yeah.
fun, fun.
Yeah.
But He wasn't afraid to enjoy time with His disciples and time with others and good food and drink and these things. So in that chapter, we kind of run the gamut from the simple pleasures of life that God gives us to enjoy,
Mhm.
but also some of the spiritual means He gives to sustain us in our weakness. Like when we talk about weakness, one thing we want to emphasize is this isn't an excuse for us to just give in
Mhm. Yeah.
to our sin, but rather it causes us to depend more on Him and His people.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah.
think it's an important clarification to
Yeah.
make. But
Yeah.
um, I will say one more thing. We've often been in a cross-cultural overseas context, and I think the Western Church has made great strides
Mhm.
in these areas over the last few generations, understanding that we're in it for the long haul, not trying to burn out in a few years.
Yeah.
And yet, what I hear still
Mhm.
in many parts of the world
Yeah.
is that mentality that there's no thought
Mhm.
for stewarding your
Yeah.
own health and marriage and family. It's
Yeah.
all go
Yeah.
100% until you crash in a couple of years. And sadly, we've
Yeah.
seen the negative outcomes of that mentality.
Yeah. Well, I love the emphasis that you have in this chapter on these are good gifts from God.
Yeah.
Because I
Hmm.
think one of the things that we're seeing a lot in books that are coming out these days are sort of a lot of conversation around habits and habit forming. And while I think we
Hmm.
would all agree that habits are important, a
Yep.
lot of times that makes the emphasis back on me and what I'm
Hmm.
doing or not
Yes.
doing, and less about God and what He is doing. And I think,
Yeah.
one of the things that you pointed out was this the gifts of just joyful enjoying each other in time and whatnot. I know
Mm.
my wife and I during COVID really found that we had opportunities to take walks together
Hmm.
that were just wonderful gifts from God that we didn't
Yep.
expect and coming out of a time of really significant stress for the whole world.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
many people learned like the value of it at that point. And interestingly, you can take that and say, well, hey, if this was so helpful in my marriage, maybe I should take a walk with somebody in ministry where I'm
Hmm.
having a difficult time or conversation with, because
Yeah.
walking is a unique way when you're side by side with somebody to have a different
Yep.
kind of conversation than you do across a desk or, in a more formal kind of setting. And so, yeah,
Mm.
it's just wonderful to think about that with you. And thank you for writing
Hmm.
that in this
Yeah.
chapter and making that pivot for us. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I recently went on a men's retreat where for several days we were hiking, and it's amazing the conversations that come up when you're just moving together. You don't
Yep.
feel like you have to talk all the time.
Yep.
But not only the beauty of nature, but that
Yep.
movement, exercise together just unlocks some of what God's given us.
Yeah. Yeah. You get into in chapter 5 something I think really important, which is strengthening your marriage bonds. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of folks think about, especially in vocational ministry, the commitments
Mm.
and convictions that they have around
Yeah.
that, maybe even formal pledges that they've made to their church or to
Mm.
the people that are supporting them or to their denomination and that kind of thing, and take that very seriously. This is something I have
Mm.
committed before God to do.
Yeah.
I think it's possible that we might not remember so easily those same kinds of vows that we made, formally,
Yeah.
oftentimes in a church context, to our
Yep.
spouse.
Hmm.
And one can tend to override the other if we're not careful. So, talk a
Right.
little bit about what you meant by strengthening the marriage bonds. What are some of the things that kind of spoke to you, and what are you telling us as we read your book about that?
Yeah. Well, um, in that chapter, we're talking about moving towards unity together,
Mhm.
um, the kind of mutual sacrifice for one another, mutual support, being with one another through all these things, and really that it is a commitment to one another. I think sometimes in ministry, like you said, you can focus more on your commitment to the church that might be paying your salary
Yeah,
and forget about your ministry to your spouse. And we don't talk about family quite as much in the book, but your
yeah,
children as well,
yeah.
that they are a part of those to whom you're supposed to be ministering as well. Yeah, so I feel like for many couples, it can be easy to overlook the need for unity in their marriage, and sometimes that means looking out for what's best for one another,
Hmm.
especially when they are going through a hard time. And
Yeah,
we touch on that as well. What do you do when your spouse is struggling? What do you do when they're having a hard time? Do you
yeah,
just plow ahead,
yeah,
or do you slow down to say we're going to stay together and work through this? And
yeah.
it's really the imagery that I would like
Mm.
to settle on for
Mhm.
that chapter is if you're running a race and one person's feeling great in the marathon and they can
Mhm.
just keep going, but one is limping or
Yeah,
they're hurting.
yeah,
And sometimes you got to slow down to
yeah.
stay together
Oh, yeah,
so that you can keep going and finish the race together.
yeah. No, that's so, what a great image that you
Mhm.
shared. And yeah, I just think about, different couples that I know in ministry. And,
Mhm.
one of the spouses, for example, might be the lead pastor of a given church or
Mhm.
something like that.
Mhm.
And the other one comes down with a cancer diagnosis. And,
Mhm.
and I've
Mhm.
seen this happen where someone who is really thoughtful about that, but who might have had
Yeah.
a very busy travel schedule and was speaking at conferences on a regular basis, having to quite intentionally say, for this season,
Yeah.
I can't really do that. And I'm going to pull back from that kind of rigorous schedule that I've had
Yeah.
to this point
Mhm.
to really just spend time with my spouse so that she knows she's cared for and that
Yeah.
someone is here for her. And that has implications because
Yeah.
you may not
Mhm.
be able to, in that season, move as
Yeah.
fast or as quickly ahead. You may not be able to write that book that you were hoping to, or whatever it might be that you're working on. But certainly the Lord is going to use that in a powerful way
Mhm.
to strengthen the marriage bonds for sure. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so one of the interesting pivots you make here in your book, which I was a little surprised by, but I was delighted also, is you talk about building a community of care. I think a lot of
Yeah.
times it can be something where things that are going on in our marriage are quite private. We don't really want to talk about that. Folks are
Mm.
often, reluctant to even get the kind of counseling that they need for their
Yeah.
marriage. And maybe, some that are watching this are even thinking, "Hey, I'm just going to get the book, and I'm not going to worry about that."
Yeah.
Um, so, talk about how you see community impacting, this marriage that has
Mm.
had some tension related to ministry and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hope that the book would lead to better community, and I hope
Yes,
that
I would hope
that's
so
just a
too.
stepping stone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a paradox because community care is so important for ministry couples, and yet it's what they often um, they often lack.
Yeah.
and sometimes for good reason, right? If you've been in the church long enough, you've probably been hurt at some point, and there can be a tendency to want to withdraw, to want
Yeah.
to be self-protective.
Hmm.
And yet it's so important to find people. And in the book, I make the case for you need people outside your ministry. They might be across the country.
Yeah.
You need people that are outside that you can talk with. And if you don't have someone, you can join a like a counseling cohort at some biblical counseling center to have someone to talk with. But it is important to try to build relationships in the church, the people you're serving as well. That's
Yeah.
sticky, it's messy, it's challenging, but it is an important part so that they can know you and minister to you. And I know often for those in pastoral ministry, they might resist that.
Hmm.
They're there to serve,
Yeah.
but it's okay to allow people to serve and minister to you as well.
Yeah.
And so the community aspect is important. So we deal with as a couple caring for each other, mostly in chapter 5, strengthening marriage bonds, but also as a couple, as a unit, letting other people speak into your lives and having those. For some, it might be being with a missions organization that is
Hmm.
supportive and gives you opportunities to
Hmm.
have others in your life.
Yeah.
Pastors might find that with someone across town or in
Hmm.
different part of the
Yeah.
country. But I strongly advocate for that because
Hmm.
too often people go without that kind of care
Yeah.
until it's too late, until
Yeah.
things really come crashing down, and then
Yeah.
they're forced to seek it.
Yeah. I know that in my own life, having a small group of men around me that I meet with on a
Yeah.
weekly basis has been incredibly important
Yeah.
in my own spiritual growth and whatnot. And my wife has been involved pretty heavily over the years in the women's ministry at our local church.
Good.
And those are very different groups. We're not
Yeah.
really interacting with each other, and often we're sharing in a different way with groups like that. But those are
Yeah.
communities that really can be life-giving for us as we let
Yeah.
God do his work in our hearts. And so it's just
Hmm.
exciting to think about how God builds us as humans to want to be in community, and how he can
Yeah.
use that to, even point out our sin patterns and our flaws,
Hmm.
and have people help us to see those things that we may not even be seeing, that we're contributing in our own marriages, that can be problematic. So,
Yeah.
but
And it takes humility to live that
yeah,
way, to live
yeah,
in integrity in a community that knows you.
yes,
But it's so vital. And I think there's a shifting culture where
yeah,
we understand it's okay. We don't have to pretend to be the
no,
perfect pastor
yeah,
or the perfect missionary. It's okay to admit where there's areas that need strengthened or where we need help. And that's been a good cultural shift.
yeah.
Um, and I think we want to just build on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you finished up the book, you ended in a really, I thought, very positive place. This idea of thriving in sustainable ministry. I
Yeah.
mean, I think for all of us, we want to be thriving, and the
Yeah.
idea, of ministry that is sustainable feels maybe
Mm.
for some almost impossible. For others,
Yeah.
it's certainly the goal or the thing that they would like to see. But as we both know, so often in church and on the mission field, it's marriages and interpersonal relationships
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
make ministry unsustainable, and
Yeah.
and truncated in some way. And so,
Hmm.
talk about kind of your hopes and dreams and aspirations for this couple, who is taking God's word seriously, taking what you have said
Hmm.
seriously, and why you were able to even use language like thriving and sustainable from your
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. I think the hopeful aspect was born in some part out of some of the darker times in our own experience,
Wow.
where there were times where my wife and I wondered. In fact, my wife said to me, like, I think most of our conflict, most of our tension is because we're doing ministry together. I think
Mm,
if, when I was in seminary, I was
yeah.
working in IT, doing something totally separate. And,
Yeah.
we thought, okay, would it be different?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we saw God bring us through that season.
Hmm.
Wise counsel, wise input, community care, uh, brought us through a difficult time. And we saw little by little God's transforming in our own marriage.
Hmm.
And I don't believe it's because we're just naturally compatible or two
Yeah.
easygoing people.
Yeah.
Uh, I I saw God bring change in our life. And so that's why there were times where we thought, I don't know how long we can keep doing this.
Mm.
And we saw God bring change. And so that's why I'm hopeful that there can be thriving. And I've seen that happen in our lives. So my hope
Yeah.
for other couples,
Yeah.
whether they're reading this on the front end before they're getting very far into their
Yeah.
relationship, or they've
Yeah.
been married for decades and now
Hmm.
they're at a place where they're wondering
Hmm.
where they go from here. Um, I I believe that this is where God brings the change when we start to put this into practice, invite His help, take advantage of what He's already given us. Then, yeah, I don't want it to sound trite or easy, but I truly
Yeah.
believe that couples can thrive together even when all the chaos of ministry is surrounding them.
Yeah.
Sometimes it makes hard. It means there's hard choices. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it might mean a shift
Yeah.
in ministry for a season. Um, But I I've seen God change and bring rescue marriages.
Yeah.
So I believe He'll do that, and I hope
Yeah.
that's my hope for the book is that many will
Yeah.
experience that as well.
Yeah. Well, we certainly do as well. And as we wrap up our time together, and what a great conversation this has been, I
Yeah.
want to think about kind of sort of some nuggets we can leave with someone who might be watching this,
Mm,
and maybe they've thought, huh. Yeah, this is me. I'm really
mm,
struggling in my marriage, or yeah, this ministry thing is going so well, but why isn't my marriage? And that kind of
yeah.
thing. Um,
Yeah.
any thoughts on kind of like a first step for
Mm,
someone who just knows that this is an issue, but just doesn't know what to do? Do you
yeah.
have a sense of where you would suggest that they start?
Yeah. Well, the easy answer is, of course, read the book, right?
Yep.
But I would start by uh, talking with someone that you trust.
Yeah.
That if there's a someone in your life that
Hmm.
you see a God honoring marriage,
Yeah.
and you see a faithfulness in ministry. It doesn't have to be a
Hmm.
mega church. It doesn't have to be a leader of some large ministry, but you
Yeah.
see someone who's faithful and you see a marriage that honors God. Uh, I would take that step, ask them to
Hmm.
if they'd be willing to meet with you.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people don't have that.
Yeah.
They don't have a model to follow, and
Yeah.
it's okay. If I, I would say that I would say reach out.
Yeah.
If you don't know anybody
Yeah.
in your own life, contact a biblical counseling center. And often that's not going to be the solution to everything, but it can
Yeah.
be that first step
Yeah.
that's going to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
When we don't do anything, when we
Yeah.
say it'll just
Yeah.
work itself out,
Right.
then often things just decline over time rather than
Yeah.
starting on that upward trend.
Yeah. So if I heard you correctly, read the book, talk to a ministry couple that you respect and
Yeah,
see, and possibly
yeah,
consider getting some actual biblical counseling
yeah,
with another human that really is skilled, maybe in this particular area that can
yeah,
help you. So that's great. Um,
yeah,
what about for the couple who knows that this is the issue, and maybe this has
mm,
been years they've been struggling, and they are on the edge of burnout or even
yeah,
divorce?
yeah,
What can you say to them in terms of hope, of even the
yeah,
possibility of restoration?
yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we think that some of these things are far removed, but sometimes it ministry marriages can feel like a house of cards where everything looks good until a
Mm-hmm.
wind blows and it all comes crashing down. So
Mm-hmm.
I I would say in those cases, if you feel like your marriage is on the brink,
Mm-hmm.
if possible, pause some of the other responsibilities to attend to your relationship because that is
Yeah.
a lifelong commitment that God's given to you.
Yeah.
And even if that comes at a high cost
Mm-hmm.
temporarily to the
Yeah. Yeah.
ministry,
Yeah.
it's worth pausing. In the
Yeah.
book somewhere I use the example of a flat tire. Now, being near divorce might be
Hmm.
a lot more serious of a problem than a flat
Yeah.
tire, but
Yeah.
you can keep going for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
And it feels like everything's okay. It might be a little bumpy, but you'll keep going, but you will not make it far.
That's right.
Or if your engine's overheating, you won't make it far and you'll
Yeah.
have much more disastrous problems to deal with. So I'd say if you feel like you're on the brink, pause, get the help now, not so that
Hmm.
you can get back to whatever vocational ministry, but so the marriage is in a healthy and God honoring spot,
Yeah.
no matter what step he has next for you.
Yeah.
And that uh, might mean coming back to that particular ministry. Maybe it'll be a new chapter
Yeah.
for you, but
Yeah.
um, yeah,
So take that first step and see how God
yeah,
leads. Take it
yep,
seriously.
yeah,
So absolutely. Well, this has been
yeah.
a delightful conversation. We want to just say for those who may have been watching this conversation for the first time that,
Mm.
again, this is the book Together for Good by Justin Smith, available wherever you purchase great Christian books. For those who are interested in getting bulk copies of this book, certainly we at PNR would love to help with that. Our website is prpbooks.com, and you can certainly reach out to us, and we would love to help get those in your hands. And Justin, we certainly wish you well with your ministry there, that God would sustain you and that you yourself would
Thank you.
continue to have a thriving marriage, and are so delighted to be your partner in this ministry endeavor together.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. It's been great to be here.
All right, thanks.